James Farr here, live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative. The Conversation Live starts now. And welcome to another episode of The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Coming up today on The Conversation Live, we're going to have a critical and uncomfortable conversation. Civil rights attorney Dale Grunemeyer is in the seat today. We're going to unpack and discuss Pasadena Police Department, the use of force, some use of force incidents that resulted in death. We also want to take a look at RIPA and how they'll implement that. And then Dale has a very interesting background in the civil rights movement. We'll talk a little bit more about how he got sick and tired of being sick and tired. But let's first, Jared, let's roll up this first clip. November 9th incident involving 21-year-old motorist Christopher Ballou. Let's take a look at it and we'll talk to Dale on the other side.
S75, we're in a fight. Come on, bro. Give me your hands. Give me your hands. Give me your hands.
Only on 9 tonight, an Altadena man is accusing 2 Pasadena police officers of lying after this violent arrest. The use of force case involves police body cam, dash cam, and bystander video.
Now, KCAL9's Jeff Nguyen tonight live in Pasadena with both sides of the story. Jeff?
Susie and Jeff, the police department here says back in March, it pulled 2 of its officers from the field indefinitely. The department has released dash cam video as well as body cam video of the violent confrontation, but this lawsuit says that they do not match up with what the officers wrote in their police reports.
I literally was back in the gurney for a little bit.
22-year-old Chris Ballou says vivid memories came rushing back after he saw photos of his bloody face and broken leg for the first time during our interview.
Stop back like a dummy, dude.
It stems from this violent arrest involving Pasadena police officers Larry Esparza and Zachary Lujan that was captured on multiple cameras last November following a traffic stop in which Ballou's car was missing a front license plate and had dark window tint. He's seen struggling with the officers over a police baton in which Ballou says he was trying to prevent them from hitting him, and he was never the aggressor.
I'm blood in my eyes, man.
In a recently amended lawsuit, Ballou claims the police reports are inconsistent with the videos. For instance, Esparza wrote, "Officer Lujan and I were able to use his momentum and pushed him to the ground, inadvertently causing his face to hit the cement." But the suit says Officer Lujan deliberately smashed Ballou's face into the asphalt.
I feel as though the video speaks for itself.
Civil rights attorney John Burton says his client was hit with strikes that were potentially lethal.
The number of blows, the location of the blows are all misstated on the police report.
The city of Pasadena sent us a statement saying, "We owe it to our residents and our public servants to thoroughly review the incident. It would not serve the public interest to engage in a back and forth in the media as a substitute for that review."
Maybe this can serve as an example that you can't just do what you want to do.
Chris Ballou was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon on peace officers. However, the district attorney's office declined to prosecute. The lawsuit against the police department as well as the city is expected to go to trial in April of next year.
And welcome back. Dale Grunemeyer's in the seat. Dale, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome back to Pasadena.
Good to be back.
It's good to be back. You know, it's been a little bit quiet since you've been gone.
That's what some people tell me.
Yeah, you know, you come back full beard now. I looked and I said, he walks like Dale. Had a hat on, had glasses on, but something was certainly different. So again, you're back in town this week because you're being honored by POP, a Lifetime Achievement Award for some of the work that you've done, tireless work, champion work that you've done in terms of civil rights issues around police. But I wanted to kind of, you're like a missing piece in kind of an episodic journey in terms of me from a journalistic standpoint of some of the stories that I've covered over the last 16, 18 months. And time didn't allow it. You were moving away, about to retire. You haven't retired yet, but you were moving away. And so I'm glad that we had this opportunity. We met around this case. You know, it was
Ballou case.
The Ballou
yes,
case.
Absolutely.
And I had did an interview with former Chief Sanchez, and then we were connected and we looked and produced the film with John Burton that was commissioned by Pop. So kind of looking back into that story, let's go back then, you know, what was going on then? What were you thinking? Because there was a lot of organizing happening, a lot of strategizing happening around the incident.
Well, look, the reality is that there's a inevitable tendency of the police department and the power structure to circle the wagons, defend their officers, and dismiss the criticism of the bad apples. So Pop commissioned that video that you did and a second video in order to throw light on to the Ballou beating. So it was a piece of advocacy. It was an attempt to counter the kind of stuff that has been coming out of the police department. And to, in my view, the officers Lujan and Esparza should have been immediately put on administrative leave, should have, their actions were indefensible, clearly excessive force. The department has not acted in the way that I think it should have to deal with these two who are bad apples.
So, I mean, suspension or firing?
Well, look, I firmly defend the right of police officers and other public employees to have due process. So I don't think you can, somebody who has job tenure, that you can appropriately fire them. You could institute prompt internal review and disciplinary action so that that process could have gone forward and these officers disciplined with termination. But until that happens, they've got a due process right, and I think that's important for all public employees to have a due process right that they can't be fired without being able to mount a defense. So I've never advocated they should be fired without that due process. I think if they had a legitimate, Pasadena had a legitimate process, they would be fired. Mm-hmm. I don't think Pasadena has a legitimate process.
Yeah, I mean, there's no civilian oversight, there's no police commission.
Well, and things are being run in the Ballou case by the attorneys for Esparza and Lujan. What we really would like our police departments to do is, after an incident like this, promptly investigate it and take disciplinary action if it's warranted. They have completely stopped the disciplinary process or any internal review, as well as an external review, because of the pendency of a lawsuit. And that is ass backwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they're saying that they're waiting for the lawsuit to play itself out.
They are.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, nothing is being learned about what went wrong. Officers are who have engaged in such wrongdoing, so patently widely known, are continuing to work. The city's going to pay out $500,000 at least in wages to them that they shouldn't have to if they would take the appropriate steps. Having the lawyers for the police officers
mm-hmm.
dictate the process. Lawyers have a fiduciary duty. They have a duty of deep loyalty to anybody they take on as a client. And both the city attorney and the lawyers representing the city are representing not just the city, but also the officers. Now, how can, and if you look forward to an internal review process, the city attorney's office sits in as part of the decision-making process. How can they, with a fiduciary duty to these officers and that conflict of interest, how can they really fairly decide it?
I mean, I'm not an attorney, but
Yeah.
I know a little bit. So, but isn't that more of is there an ethical issue there? That, I mean, is there?
Yeah, I think it is atrociously unethical and a violation of the rules of professional conduct for, as a general matter, you can't represent conflicting interests. Once they ripen, you can get waivers of potential conflicts of interest. But if there's a real conflict of interest, and there ought to be a real conflict of interest here, if the city were to act independently and fairly.
Now, I mean, you've worked and litigated against the city. I mean, you've met with the city manager, Steve Ramel. You guys had a professional relationship, and you've known him for many, many, many years, as well as our city attorney, Michelle Bonarise. Why do you think the decision is made for them to proceed that way? I mean, if you're just kind of based on what you know, because from the outside looking in, it just looks like a conflict, and us lay people don't understand how this is business as usual. And so you have any insight as to maybe what their thought process is?
There is a kind of, I think, a jaded, this is getting into sort of, in a sense, inside legal baseball, but frankly, a lot of lawyers for institutions in both the corporate world and in public entities don't differentiate between defending their they see defending their institution as the be-all and end-all, and don't really look carefully at conflicts of interest. And the problem is, if what's driving this, the evaluation of this incident, is making sure that Chris Ballou does not obtain a monetary judgment against the city, if that's what's driving it, justice, public accountability, ensuring that officers don't get away with the kind of thing that occurred, is all put on the back burner. And that's what's happening in Pasadena now.
So you're saying that they are more interested in protecting the house and not the residents and citizens of the city of Pasadena. Because in fairness, I mean, Chris does deserve justice in some capacity. I mean, he obviously, when he was being interrogated by the sergeant who approved the arrest, the independent expert report that his lawyer commissioned even suggested that he should not have been arrested at all. But instead, he was allowed to. Let me check in. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today is civil rights attorney Dale Grunemeyer. Dale's back in town, and Dale's been very active with groups here in the city, from POP to CCOP. He's worked with NAACP. And I mean, we can go on and on about Dale's resume. Very good article if you want to read a little bit more background on Dale in Pasadena Now today. Give you a little bit of background on him. The second thing that I want to talk to you about, Dale, and this event actually happened just about a few weeks before the Ballou incident, was Reginald Thomas Jr. When responding officers came onto scene. Let's take a look at this clip, Jared, and then we'll talk with Dale on the other side of it.
Deadly encounter with police in Pasadena. Protesters have been outside an apartment building after officers used a taser on a man, and he died in the scuffle. It happened near Orange Grove and Marengo. KCAL 9's Cara Finstrom is there live for us, and she's got some new information. Cara?
Much sadness here, Sandra, and a lot of questions about how this man's life ended. Behind us, you can see there's a strong police presence here, a lot of family, a lot of friends who have been here since very early this morning. We do have some pictures we want to show you of the man who died. Family members tell us his name is Reginald Thomas, that he was 36 years old, and that he was a father of 8 children who was expecting his 9th child and had long battled mental illness. We want to let you listen now to the frustration expressed when police came out earlier this afternoon to talk with reporters.
Clearly tensions are high. I understand.
That's right. That's right.
Black Lives Matters protesters also speaking out there. The sergeant says police came out here at about 2 this morning when they got a 911 call for help. Family and friends say this man had called police himself, that he was looking for help. We've also got some video of his expectant girlfriend who was too upset to speak on camera. Police say when 6 officers showed up here at the apartment this morning, the man had a knife and a fire extinguisher, and that somehow everything escalated with officers shooting the taser and then using physical force to restrain him before he died. Police say 2 of the officers were also injured and that there were 2 other people in the home when all of this happened. We spoke with a cousin of the man who says he has many questions.
I was raised with him all my whole life, and he's had issues most of his life, but the police are very aware, especially the Pasadena police, are very aware of the type of person that they're dealing with. My questions were, if they had a special unit to deal with a guy with a medical condition that he has, and does that unit work all night?
And officers here said they did try to perform CPR on that man to try and save his life. They did ask everyone here, a lot of tension out here this morning, to be patient. They say they are just beginning their investigation and will be looking into this fully.
And welcome back, man. It's tough still watching this stuff. I mean, I was there for 12 hours that day, and some things you just can't unsee and can't unexperience. But de-escalation. I mean, now we have the bill that just passed that the Assemblywoman Weber out of San Diego pushed through in terms of requiring officers to de-escalate first. When we look at what happened on that night, when officers arrived on scene and they knew who they were contacting, they had prior history with him. How is it, is it just the culture at that time that officers weren't de-escalating? I mean, how is it that we end up in this situation?
Black lives often don't matter, is the practical reality. J.R. Thomas was really tragic. He was seeking, he had called the police. I think the leadership now of Chief Perez recognize the need for de-escalation, more de-escalation training. But it's a slow process. Getting what has historically been a macho culture, a white culture, a culture with a lot of racism in it, and that's not to knock cops. They do a tough job. Society, we community give them a tough job to do. I've always argued they're entitled to good compensation, to retirement. I've gone down to City Hall to support pay raises for them, but we've got a long way to go to get a more responsive de-escalatory approach. The city has frankly been resistant on a policy level to CCOP has advocated doing what the Weber bill does, and there's been resistance to that, but now it's state law, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. I don't think it is, I wouldn't rate the level of malevolence by those officers in the same category as Esparza and Lujan with Ballou, but the result, in fact, was more tragic than in the Ballou case.
I mean, because when the compelled officer statements were misfiled in the Thomas case, and I know you had a chance to read them, I had a chance to read them, read it rather, and just hearing the mindset of the officer and kind of what was going through his mind in terms of him not wanting to be on TV the next morning, and you know, his thinking about his family, and then trying to balance that against hearing the 911 calls and the grainy video at that time, because officers weren't wearing body-worn cameras. It's tough, you know, and so you said earlier Black lives often don't matter. So is it just that, you know, because you've had an experience, and I want to get into that in just a few minutes, you know, living in Mississippi. Is it that it's just that easy to disregard and kill someone? Because even though they may have a mental health issue, is that just the reality of it, or?
Well, that's, you know, I mean, that's America. That's it's just one manifestation of white dominance and disregard for all the historic injustice to African Americans. It's not an accident that it is young black men who are characteristically being the ones who are the victims of the police. So we've got a long ways to go. We've come some distance, but we've got a long ways to go.
I mean, because I know back when we're looking at the expert report in the Ballou case, you know, it talks about the numbers of African Americans that are stopped by the Special Enforcement Unit, you know, and so that's something that's not glossed over. I mean, that was a unit that was actively in an area looking for someone that looked like this. Chris is just lucky that he wasn't dead.
He was, yeah.
You know,
came so close.
So close.
Lujan had his, or actually, Esparza, I guess it was, had his finger on the trigger. Lujan intervened, and as John Burton has said oftentimes, police are taught if you pull the gun, and not so much pull the gun, but you put your finger on the trigger, you need to intend to shoot. So it's pretty clear that Esparza was going to shoot. Fortunately, Lujan crossed the path and he put the gun away.
I thought we'd have time to discuss RIPA, and I'll do that in another episode, another segment. Let me bring up this next package because I want to look a little bit into your background. You haven't always been in Pasadena and rebel rousing over on Garfield. At some point, you spent some time with the woman who famously said she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. So let's go ahead and roll in this last clip, Jared, and then we'll talk with talk with Dale on the other side of it and his experience with Miss Fannie Lou Hamer.
The testimony before the Credentials Committee, the FDP had a lineup of very different people. They had Rita Schwerner, the widow of Mickey, who had been killed in Neshoba County. They had Martin Luther King. Everybody knew King.
The seating of the delegation from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party has political and moral significance far beyond the borders of Mississippi or the halls of this convention.
But the highlight of the testimony was that of Fannie Lou Hamer. The sharecropper who had been evicted from her plantation had come to symbolize the Mississippi movement.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, it was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen.
The president, Lyndon Johnson, he's not afraid of Martin Luther King's testimony. He's afraid of Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And so he decides that the country should not see her testify live.
Johnson is in the White House, and he convened an impromptu press conference.
We will return to this scene in a...
Yeah. Welcome back. Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes.
I understand that you actually were like security, like a bodyguard for her. You protected her.
I did one evening. I went to Mississippi in 1964 for Freedom Summer. I was the communications director and security for the Ruleville project. We had about 15 volunteers working for SNCC to register voters and to run Freedom Summer schools. So Fannie Lou Hamer was from Ruleville. She didn't spend most of the summer there because she was a leading spokesperson for SNCC and for the Mississippi Summer Project. But about halfway through the summer, SNCC made the decision. It would have been done by probably Stokely Carmichael and Julian Bond, that I should move and live in their home to give them greater protection. And while I was in that position, living in Fannie Lou Hamer's home, we got a word from SNCC that they had gotten information from the FBI that there was going to be an assassination attempt on Mrs. Hamer. It happened that Mrs. Hamer was home. We moved her to another house, and Lynn Edwards and I alternated all night with a shotgun pointed at the front door so that if anybody came through, we would defend ourselves. Nothing happened. Lynn Edwards, by the way, is now a retired Superior Court judge in Santa Clara County, and he's going to come down for the event on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
But he was then a law student at the University of Chicago.
Last question before we get out of here, because we're hard up on getting out. What did you take away from your experience with her, and like how has that kind of showed up with you today?
I was certainly anti-racist, very committed to the civil rights movement, but a lot of it was an intellectual commitment, and living with people like Fannie Lou Hamer, poor people, and they had the courage to fight racism, was an inspiration for my life.
Dale Grunemeyer has been my guest again. Thank you so much, Dale. Congratulations on the Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you for mentoring many of us here in the community. Till we have another opportunity to check in with you, as always, Agape.
Mm-hmm.
The Conversation Live is brought to you by